Hello, welcome to America First Radio, your prescribed freedom-loving, patriotic bitch slap from the heartland of America. Hey, have you ever noticed how high on the Bill of Rights the Founding Fathers put the Second Amendment? That's no accident. They just came off of a brutal war to win our freedom from a dictatorship overseas that suppressed basic human rights like freedom of speech and, yes, the right to keep and bear arms. Yes, this one is for all you anti-gun zealots out there. The captain seems to agree with me, so let's get started. Now, I could sit here all day and spew out endless statistics and facts, which I will get to later. I could tell you things like more people are killed every year by guns, knives, and poisonings than they are shot. I could sit here and tell you that automobile accidents account for more deaths every year by far than anything from a firearm. Those things aren't going to matter to you folks at all, though. I already know that. I could sit here all day and tell you that statistically, so-called assault weapons don't add at all to the accounts of gun violence or mortality rate when there is a shooting. At all. I've also heard the inane argument that, well, people don't need high-powered firearms. Well, they don't need a Ferrari or a Corvette that can go 180 miles an hour down the road either, but there they are. Last I checked, we had a Bill of Rights, not a Bill of Needs anyway. Licensed guns like automobiles, you say? Well, first, there's no evidence whatsoever that licensing guns cuts down on instances of violence at all. Do criminals license their weapons? I don't think so. And there's nothing exclusively in the Bill of Rights anyway that guarantees us the right to keep and bear an automobile. Now, I usually do this mostly ad-lib off the top of my head, but I am going to be reading a few facts and statistics to you just briefly here. These are from places like the ATF, the FBI crime statistics, and certain Supreme Court justices' rulings, so I'm not just pulling these out of my ass. Okay, let's get started. A few of the myths I'd like to address right now. The one of my favorites, gun registration works. Allow me to read right now. Not in California, apparently. California has had handgun registration since 1909, and it has not had any impact on the violent crime rate whatsoever. New Zealand, same thing. They repealed their gun registration law in the 1980s after police acknowledged its worthlessness. Oh, here's another one I like a lot. Registration does not lead to confiscation. Wrong. It did in Canada. The handgun registration law of 1934 was the source used to identify and confiscate without compensation over half of the registered handguns in 2001. It did in Germany. I'll just read off a few other places where it did. Australia, California, New York. All of these places had handgun registration that eventually led to confiscation. Here is one of my favorites right here. You hear this constantly from the anti-gun zealots. The militia clause is just to arm the National Guard. Wrong. Fact, the Dick Act of 1903 designated the National Guard as the organized militia, and that all other citizens were, in fact, the unorganized militia. Thus, the National Guard is only part of the militia, and the whole militia is composed of the population at large. Here's another good one. The origin of the phrase, a well-regulated militia, that comes from a 1698 document called A Discourse of Government with Relation to Militias, in which the term well-regulated was equated with well-behaved, well-disciplined, regimented, and yes, in some cases, well-armed and well-supplied. In fact, the original 13 colonies, the majority of the states had their own Constitution and Bill of Rights drawn up long before we had ours as a country. And in fact, most of them had the right to keep and bear arms clauses that clearly guaranteed an individual's right to keep and bear arms. Some of them were Connecticut, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island, to name a few. Here's another myth I enjoy. Assault weapons are a serious problem in the United States. Well, the fact is, in 1994, before the federal assault weapons ban came into being, you were 11 times more likely to be beaten to death than to be killed by an assault weapon. In the first 7 years since the ban was lifted, murders declined 43%, violent crime 43%, and rapes 27%. That's in the first 7 years that ban was lifted. I've heard the argument that says stricter gun control laws could have... I've heard the argument that stricter gun control laws could have prevented Columbine. Wrong. The fact is, Harris and Klebold violated close to 20 firearms laws in obtaining their weapons. Would 21 laws really have made a difference? Here's another one you hear a lot. If it saves the life of just one child, gun control is worth it, right? Maybe not. Firearms in private hands are used an estimated 2.5 million times each year to prevent crime. That's 6,849 times per day. This includes rapes, aggravated assaults, and kidnappings. The number of innocent children protected by firearm owners far outweighs the number of children harmed. And I could go again into the statistics about how many more children are killed in car accidents, poisonings, and drownings individually every year than they are harmed by handguns. Another argument I enjoy is the fact that supposedly waiting periods prevent rash crimes and serious violent crimes. Again, no. Fact is, the time to crime of a firearm is about 11 years, making it rare that a newly purchased firearm is used in a crime. Now, let's address the fun-filled topic of genocide and gun control, shall we? Outside of war, the greatest loss of human life is in the 20th century came from governments. I don't think there's any argument there. In 1911, Turkey established gun control. Subsequently, from 1915 to 1917, 1.5 million Armenians deprived of their means to defend themselves were rounded up and killed. The Soviet Union, 1929, established gun control. Then from 29 to 1953, approximately 20 million dissidents were rounded up and killed. I could go on. Germany, I don't think I need to tell you what happened there. China, Cambodia, Guatemala, Uganda, they all have similar stories with similar endings. Okay, here's the deal. Trust me, I could do this all day. I could sit here and continuously spew out facts and statistics that would bore the hell out of you, that for any number of halfway intelligent people out there, you can look the same stuff up that I just outlined for you, okay? We shouldn't have to do this as Second Amendment freedom-loving patriots. All these things boil down to is talking points to appease the gun zealots out there that want to slowly, methodically start eroding our Second Amendment rights. And I get it. I get it already. You're saying to yourself right now, nobody's taking your guns. Shut up, right? No, we all understand that's not how it works. It is a slow, methodical erosion of our basic rights. And I tell you what, once those dominoes start to fall, it's almost impossible to start picking them up again. So you think our founders were too ignorant to understand that times and people change, that the population would not grow in this country and technology progresses? You really think they were too ignorant to understand that? Well, I invite you then to go read the Constitution. Go read the Bill of Rights. Don't just read it, understand it. In particular, go read the Federalist Papers, number 29 and 46 in particular. If you don't know what those are already, then you've really got no business debating or arguing the Second Amendment at all. Go read them, then get back with me and tell me how ignorant you think the founders were. I'll wait. Okay, and let me reiterate again that none of this should be necessary. All this boils down to are talking points to try to appease other people, okay? A few years ago, I was in a debate with an individual on the same topic of gun control. After every statistic I put out there, he would come back and say, you know what, that's great, but that's not the best argument you could make right there. I'd put out another fact or another statistic. Every time, he would rebuke me by saying, you know what, that's not the best argument you could make there. And I started to think, wow, another anti-gun zealot. That's great. I'm going to end this debate real quick. But he stopped me. He stopped me and he said, man, all of your facts were correct. He said, all your statistics were right on the money. But he stopped me and he said, man, none of that is the best argument you could make for any of this. He said, the only argument you need for any American is because. Just because. And that's it. It's no more complicated than that. I don't get what people don't seem to understand about shall not be infringed. It's pretty simple. All right, with all that said, hey, look us up on Facebook and YouTube under America First Radio. I'm also on Twitter under The Real BP65. I'd also like to give a shout out to a couple of wonderful websites that I encourage you folks to go look up your own information. Here's two great ones right here that have tons of research information on it, verifiable research information. One is called Gunsight, and the other is called Gun Facts Info. Gunfacts.info. Look both of those up. They're very well put together sites. I'm in no way affiliated with them. I'm not advertising for them. I just like them. So go look them up and then come back and check us out again for our next bit. And y'all have a good evening.